Morning, everyone. How's it all going? We're on the last day of NAB 2017. It's been a great show. A lot of really cool stuff. Canon's got the new C700 out on display for the first time at an NAB show, as well as the new 7200 you just saw on screen. Again, my name is Loren Simons. I'm the senior product trainer based out of the Burbank facility. If any of you were in the LA area or go there for work a lot, we've got a new top-of-the-line facility that we're actually just building out. It'll be open in July for all of our educational efforts. We've got really some great stuff out of there. We've got a two-lane prep room. We've got a two-bay edit suite. We've got a stage with a gridded ceiling. We've got power distribution. And then sort of the crown jewel of that new facility is a DI suite with a 4K barcode projector and an SGO Mystica system. So at Canon, we're sort of designed to show you the entire Cinema EOS production workflow from prep to post. So it kind of has to do with what we're talking about today, actually. And the idea of today is that there actually is no perfect camera. There are just the right tools for the right jobs. And Canon has a whole bunch of tools. So we're going to look at how I'm using the three main Canon cameras in a single production to get the best shot no matter the production environment. So first off, I don't like to bury the lead. I know everyone's sort of most interested in the C700. This is the newest in the Cinema EOS lineup. It is sort of our Hollywood A camera. It is designed to work in a larger scale production environment where we've got an operator, a first AC, second AC. There are a lot of really key things about this camera that make it a viable A camera. So we're going to look at a couple of those things. First, we're going to look at large scale production. So the ergonomics of this camera are pretty different than anything we've ever made in the Cinema EOS lineup before. It's got an elongated body, which is ideal for balancing the camera and rigging. So when you're operating this camera on a tripod, or you're going to start adding all sorts of gack on top, maybe a Teradek wireless video transmitter, or some larger batteries, some Preston MDR. As you start to add and build things on, the elongated body allows you to sort of build that stuff on in a more balanced way, versus if anyone's ever operated something like a C300 Mark II or some of our more traditional sort of body style. When you build that stuff up, it starts to get a little bit of a Frankenstein sort of directional build. So the elongated body is really, really key for sort of integrating into that larger scale production environment. Then a really big deal for the large scale group when you're working with an operator and an AC is it's our first camera that's got dual side operation. So whether you're on smart or dummy side of the camera, you've got the same controls available to you. This little remote panel, our remote OU700, aptly named, is connected with a remote cable, and you can run that cable pretty long, so you can actually put that at the base of a jib, so you have full camera control, whether the camera's up on a crane, up in the rafters, and it's reliable, a wired connection. Then, of course, we've got professional power options. So this is what's really cool about the C700. It's the first camera we've ever made that have power output options. Of course, all of our cameras have power input, AC and battery, but this is the first camera we've ever built that actually really integrates into that large-scale production environment and gives us power out. We've got a 2-pin 12-volt power out and a 3-pin 24-volt power out. They're in the standard ARRI pin configuration. So if you've got existing cables for your accessories, like a small HD monitor, a Teradek wireless video transmitter, you can actually plug into that camera using the same cable that you might use on your Alexa or even your Red DSMC system. So it's, again, building into that large-scale production environment. And then sort of one of my favorite things is the remote expandability of the camera. So this camera, you can actually plug into it using our RCV100, which is a little paint box. So if you're using it in sort of a broadcast environment like we've got here, you can plug in, you can do all your lift, gamma, gain adjustments and all your offsets for color, and you can do that all remotely and live. So that is a really great tool for sort of the broadcast environment. But then there are other companies like Red Rock Micro that build devices that are sort of ideal for more of a narrative environment. So we can actually use Red Rock Micro. They're showing a great device over there called the Navigator. And what this does is it plugs into the C700, and it actually sort of acts as an RCV100, and it allows you to assign buttons. You have 4 assignable buttons. You can control our autofocus. You can turn on and off LUTs. And then you can also control focus and iris, all from the single controller. So the idea behind Canon is that we're not this closed source system. We have open protocols so other manufacturers can build on our system. And then, of course, we also have this really great little WFT E8, which is a wireless adapter that plugs into the camera, same one as the C300 Mark II, and allows us to get wireless video, wireless camera control to anything like an iPad, a laptop, anything that can connect to a Wi-Fi signal. So again, the camera doesn't just stop local, it's got expandability options, which is really great, again, depending on the environment you're shooting in. Then advanced image capture. So the C700, of course, is our top-of-the-line camera. There are a lot of really cool things this camera does in terms of sensor and actually capturing our image. So first, and this is a first for Canon, is the camera comes in both a rolling shutter and a global shutter version. So for those of you unfamiliar with that terminology, a rolling shutter is what most of our cinema cameras are. It's what most cinema cameras are, in fact. And basically how it works is it scans up and down, or it scans up when it's trying to read the image. So what the benefit of that is that you get more dynamic range, you get some of our autofocus features, but the drawback is if you're doing very quick pans, you can get skewing. If any of you ever seen sort of the rolling shutter artifact of skew, a straight line, as you pan, if it's scanning up and down, it will be scanned in a different position as you pan. So you can get some rolling shutter artifacts with a rolling shutter sensor. Although our rolling shutter is very fast on this camera, I have never seen rolling shutter artifact with the C700. However, what you can still see is flash banding. So when you do a flash exposure, you'll get sort of half exposure for a frame because, again, that flash is so fast and the sensor's just scanning that it's not going to fill the entire frame. As well as if you shoot car commercials, that's sort of the biggest one for me. Shooting car commercials, you'll see that the headlights of the new LED lights on all these high-end cars, they'll actually flicker with a rolling shutter because of the scan rates. But a global shutter, the way that global shutters work is they just discharge the entire sensor at one time. It's one single exposure. So there is no rolling shutter artifact, there is no half-exposed frame with a flash, and there is no LED flicker because it's just an entire single discharge. So they come in both options. Of course, the rolling shutter version has a little bit more dynamic range. It has a 15-stop dynamic range. This is a really impressive dynamic range. This is a Xyla chart right here made by DSC Labs over yonder. This is one of my favorite charts, actually. It's basically a big soft light with a piece of glass in front of it, and then NDs. So it stops down, and it can actually represent 21 stops of light in a single exposure, and we can see basically just how many stops of light our camera can capture simultaneously. And this camera in the rolling shutter mode can capture 15 stops of dynamic range, making it very key for work in HDR and all sorts of high dynamic range situations. In addition to a high dynamic range, it's also got very high ISO performance. So I shoot a lot. I shoot primarily in 800's our base ISO, but I'll shoot comfortably at 3200. I'll bump it up to 6400 if I need to, and then 12,800 sort of my top of the line before I start to really be concerned about noise. And 12,800 is a very clean image. I love shooting Xyla charts for ISO tests because you can see the structure of the noise in every stop of light that the camera can capture. And so I've got a whole series of charts that I've shot at various ISOs, and it's a very, very clean camera. And then sort of a really cool thing that's sort of a rarity in the market is we can shoot 120 frames per second in full 4K RAW. Our 4K RAW, which we'll talk about in a moment, is uncompressed 4K. So there's no compression on our RAW. So it's a very high fidelity RAW. And internally to the CFast cards, you can shoot a 60p to the XFAVC or 30p to ProRes if you'd like that. So the 4K RAW at 120 is beautiful. 120, everyone loves slow motion. Capturing those very subtle motions of, liquid is always great. Things breaking, shatters. Really, a lot of things just look very, very pretty in slow motion. So professional post integration, this camera integrates very nicely into your post workflow. Internally, it shoots ProRes or XFAVC to CFast cards. Now, the XFAVC is our proprietary codec. It is, in my opinion, a more efficient codec. It is a newer codec. It's about half the data rate of ProRes, but via my testing, it's visually lost as compared to ProRes. So I shoot XFAVC as much as possible. It's what gets me up to the 60p and 4K. ProRes internally is limited to 30p. And again, it's a more efficient, smaller codec. In addition to that, the idea of the ProRes in the camera is nice because if you're building into an existing ProRes workflow, this camera can drop right into that production. So if you're shooting, Game of Thrones, if you're shooting whatever production that is actually in an existing ProRes workflow, this camera will drop right in, and you don't have to worry about different codecs from different cameras. But that's one of the things we're talking about today, actually, is this idea of a single codec for all the cameras in your production, and all the cameras we're talking about today all shoot XFAVC. And we'll dive a bit more into that when we get to the XC10. But if you're going to shoot with the Codex RAW recorder, this is a sort of a pack that goes right in the back. It integrates. It looks very much like it's part of the camera. This will actually allow us to shoot 4K RAW to the Codex 2.0 mags. We can shoot 4.5K RAW as well as ProRes up to 60p. So there's some additional ProRes options going to that Codex recorder. And then, of course, there's plugin support for most popular NLEs, Avid, Final Cut X, that can all take both our XFAVC, obviously our ProRes, and even our RAW codecs straight into Avid. So you don't even need to use our debayer software. It can go straight into Avid. So using the plugins, you get extra metadata like our gamma curve and our gamut color space so that you can use the proper LUTs and all that good stuff. So the plugins are very, very useful. In addition to that, for the post workflow, the ability to shoot proxies, 8-bit proxies simultaneously as you're capturing 4K or 2K 12-bit to your CFast or even your Codex RAW recorder. You can shoot 1920 by 1080 or 2048 by 1080 proxies at 420 8-bit to an SD card. So you can do a very quick offline, either for dailies or for offline editing. The second you're done capturing your media, you've got proxies ready to go, which saves a huge amount of time and money in post and with your DIT. And then lastly, for the C700, extensive metadata. Using that little Wi-Fi dongle I talked about earlier, we can actually use an iPad or a laptop to input all sorts of metadata from location data. We can geotag, we can add notes, we can change all of our primary metadata. So you can have a script supervisor on set as you're shooting. They can say, okay, we're at the burger joint now. This is a tight shot, and all that metadata is actually searchable in our XFAVC software as well as our RAW software. So all of this, you can see I've added location, creator, descriptions of the shot, so I can actually search all that and sort of build a large archive, great for broadcasters, reporters who have a lot of footage, a lot of B-roll that they want to be able to quickly access and tag. So that's the C700. That's our big Hollywood A camera. Now the C300 Mark II is it's one of my go-to cameras for a lot of style of shooting, and when I call it, it's the big picture small package. If you're sort of familiar with the other camera manufacturers, one of the big ones that starts with an A, they've got their sort of studio body and then their smaller body. This, to me, is our smaller body. It's designed to cut very nicely with the C700. Again, the same codec, all the same color spaces, but it's a smaller body. It's got integrated power. We're gonna look at some of the really cool things that this camera can do in the sort of larger scale production. So the first thing you'll notice, obviously, is the single operator form factor. The C700 is longer, larger, designed for larger scale production, where the C300 Mark II is designed much more for, it's a handheld operation, gimbal operation. It feels at home in your hand versus the C700, which is more at home on your shoulder, on a Fisher dolly, in a much larger sort of environment. So this camera is definitely a more discreet, if you've got to do some pickup shots that you're may or may not have the proper permits for, which we would never recommend, camera. But you can use this smaller camera to be a bit more discreet, get a little bit more intimate with your actors, let's say that. And it's a much smaller, more intimate form factor. But it's also got the image quality that we need. So same idea. It's got that same really fast sensor readout like the C700. So the C300 Mark II only comes in rolling shutter. But it's got a very fast readout, just like the 700. So you've got really very minimal, if any, rolling shutter skew while doing even very fast whip pans. And then, of course, 15 stops dynamic range, just like the C700 in rolling shutter. But what I want to show you right now is actually just visually what 15 stops dynamic range looks like. So this is the C300 Mark I. That was a 12-stop camera using our original Canon log curve. Our own Brent Ramsey shot this photo that I've used for many of years. And what I want to show you is he's exposed the highlights of the water here to 80% on the waveform. And what we're going to do now is with the C300 Mark II, a 15-stop camera, also expose those highlights at 80%. But look at all the additional detail we're lifting out of the shadows. So again, nothing is going over that 80% IRE, but we're lifting up a lot more data. So I'll just show you back and forth. It's really day and night, 12 to 15 stops dynamic range. So having all that data there to begin with is a huge thing, especially when you're going to an HDR finish. In addition to that, just like the C700, really, really awesome high ISO performance. This is 10,000 ISO, Canon Log 3, ungraded. Very, very clean. There's a little bit of looks like encoding artifacts there, but very, very clean. You can shoot this camera at all sorts of ISOs. It makes it a great run and gun camera because of those higher ISOs. And then in addition to that, I always talk about high ISO, but in addition to high ISO, when going outside, there's 10 stops of ND built into this. So imagine this camera lives on your gimbal. You've got 2 stops, 4 stops, 6 stops, 8 stops, and 10 stops that you can literally drop in front of the sensor behind your lens on the fly, either remotely using the Wi-Fi app or physically on the camera. So this is a very, very good small form factor camera, great gimbal sort of style camera that complements the C700. And then of course it also does some high speed. It does 2K 10-bit 120 frames little jittery there, but there you go. Looks, that's just water, but looks very, sort of thick and slow. So high speed, 120. It's a very good 120. It is a center crop of the sensor though, so if you are operating and you go to 120, you're going to see a 2x focal length jump because it's basically taking exactly 1920 by 1080 portion of the sensor. And then also professional post integration, just like the C700. It's got XFAVC. This camera does not shoot ProRes like the C700, but it does shoot the same XFAVC at the same data rates, 410 megabits per second for a 30p file at 4K. It's a very robust data rate for 4K, so you can do a lot of panning and scanning. I'm never really concerned about the limitations of the 4K inside of this camera. It's very, very robust. It also has proxy recording. It will shoot the 420 8-bit 1920 or 2048 proxy to the SD cards simultaneously while capturing 4K. And then also the same extensive metadata, so you can have your scripty working on both cameras on set, marking things, marking A and B camera, and really integrating into a very nice, a really easy on-set workflow that saves you a lot of time in post-production. And then lastly, this is sort of my favorite camera because it's sort of the most underappreciated camera. This is the XC15 or the XC10. I call this the Anywhere camera. It's a very, very small camera, compact. It's a single lens camera system, so we'll look at it. It's compact, all in one package. It is a very comfortable camera to hold. If you haven't held this camera, we've got one pretty much in every booth, but there's a main one over on this side shooting the Taylor set. It is very comfortable to hold. It feels very much like a DSLR mixed with a Cinema EOS camera. There's very sort of small features that are taken from the Cinema EOS environment, but built into this very small form factor. It is light and riggable. You've got both bottom and top mount, so it's easy to do. If you're going to undersling it on a car, or if you want to sort of triangulate it with 2 points, you can do that very easily. It is sort of my action camera replacement, and we'll look at that when we get to the image, because the image of this camera is really what's remarkable. It's got a built-in Super 35 18 to 180 equivalent lens. On the lens it says 24 to 240. That is a full-frame 5D sized equivalent. But if you're doing the math and you're matching this with a C300 or C700, it's really an 18 to 180 field of view match for those cameras. So it's a very long range. It is a 2.8 to 5.6, so it does ramp, but there is really good high ISO performance in this camera, so it works out very well even if you're shooting in low light. And then it's got built-in Wi-Fi. So unlike the C300 Mark II and the C700, there's built-in Wi-Fi. So you can connect to it with your iPhone, your laptop, anything that has a web browser built in, and you can do remote run stop. You can see a live image feed, and this makes it very good for when you're mounting this camera remotely in a wheel well, outside of a car, somewhere that's inaccessible. The built-in Wi-Fi is hugely beneficial for that. Now let's talk about the image quality, so the sized image quality. This is a very, very small camera. That's a C100 Mark II behind it, which is also a very small camera. Very small camera, but it packs a punch. So the sensor size is a 1-inch sensor. I like to call it a Super 16 size sensor because it sort of builds into this full production environment. It's a larger sensor than what you'd find in a traditional action camera or a point-and-shoot camera. So you can milk some depth of field out, or some shallow depth of field out of this sensor with that lens, telephoto or wide at the 2.8. You can really milk some shallow depth of field out of here. But the biggest deal for me is the 12 stops dynamic range. So this camera shoots Canon log, and it's got a very respectable dynamic range. My idea is that every shot of your film should be pretty. You shouldn't have to sacrifice because, I've got to mount this camera outside of a car. I'm not going to mount a C700. I'm not going to mount a C300 Mark II. I don't have a camera truck. You've got this very small light camera that can be mounted with a suction cup, ideally 2 suction cups, and you're not sacrificing image quality because it's still 12 stops dynamic range. So here's just a zoom in of that. This is a popular action camera. I will leave it unnamed, but it's in their professional tuned mode, which is a little hint there. Here's some highlights. Here's the shadows. The shirt, there's really no detail there. It looks just like a black shirt. Highlights, obviously very crushed out. And then here is the XC10. You can actually see on the displays, probably easier, that this is actually a green shirt. There's more detail in those highlights now, and those shadows now, that is. You can see the texture where it goes from a leather sleeve to a green textured shirt. And then, of course, highlights outside. Yes, we're still clipping a little bit over there, but dramatically reduced. And we're just an overall better image. Of course, this is a log curve. We've got our log built in, so you're going to grade this a little bit. But again, we're starting and we're capturing more dynamic range to begin with. this is the really cool thing. It still shoots XFAVC, so all three of these cameras have shot the same codec. Now this one shoots at 305 megabits per second, slightly lower data rate because it is an 8-bit camera, but it's still a very robust data rate. I will shoot this camera in 4K and still be very comfortable punching in for a 1080 grab and moving and panning and scanning. It's a very high data rate. When you compare that to other 4K cameras in this sort of very small form factor, that's 3 times the data rate of most 4K cameras in this form. And then, of course, we've also got waveforms and XLRs built into the XC10, so you can use your professional audio. This is great for reporters who want to have a nice small camera. I've done a lot of training out of our Hollywood facility with reporters who buy this camera, they set it up on sticks, they turn on their iPhone, they frame themselves up, they've got a lav mic on, they've used the XLRs, they hit record on their phone, and they've got really easy 4K or HD workflow in the field, really sort of dead simple. So, sorry, that is all the post-production is all the same. We've got the same codecs, the same integration for NLEs, because it's that same XFAVC that's involved with this system. So that's it for the Cinema EOS production environment. Again, the idea that we've got all these different cameras, all these different tools to get you the best shot under any shooting environment. It's a really sort of unique thing that we've got to have these 3 different levels of tools to really sort of empower filmmakers to get the best images they can in any environment. So I'd like to thank you all. If you have any questions, we'll be on the other side of here with the CLL table. I have another talk that's a slightly more technical about all the different Canon log curves at 11:20 coming up. And thank you all. Let me know if you have any questions. Thank you.